Okay, so again, today's topic is about the opportunity checklist in Command, and we're going to go through a buyer checklist and a listing checklist. And they're not going to be significantly different. It just depends on what hat you're wearing. Are you wearing the hat representing your buyer, or are you wearing the hat representing your seller? All right. So the goal is, again, to come up with some basic checklists that helps you as the agent, that helps your market center in terms of compliance, right? Because as you go through the sales process, you have to submit documents to your market center for compliance purposes. And if we can come up with a checklist for you, the agent, that also matches what the compliance manager is looking for, then it'll be a much smoother process for both you, the buyer agent, the seller's agent, and the compliance team, and getting you all the way to the closing table so that when you want to get paid, when you have a closing and you want to get paid, that's going to be a more seamless process. Because I work with the leadership team as well, and some of the complaints that they have is people don't have their documents uploaded, or they're missing initials and signatures, and all those missed opportunities, missed information can delay the closing. Well, it could delay the closing, but more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but it can delay you getting paid, right? And we're in this to get paid, right? So what I've broken down is, let me go to Command first. So in Command, we have our opportunities. And within the opportunities, we have various phases of the listing life cycle, phases of the buyer life cycle, and things like cultivate, appointment, they're active, they're under contract, and they're closed. So these are already predefined for you, and you can't change these. You can't change cultivate to something else. You can't change appointment. You can't change that. What you can change are some of the stages inside. So I'm going to click on one of those as an example. And so the default stages would have been watch, nurture, and hot. Watch, nurture, and hot. And I've added some clarity on mine because you can customize these. And I said, watch is someone that's more than 9 months out in the future. More than 9 months out in the future. So for example, Kathy, if someone calls you today and says, hey, I'm thinking of buying a place next spring, not this spring, but next spring, you could then add them in this opportunity of watch 9 months in the future. And then the process that we're looking to figure out is, what are your to-dos when they're in this phase, this stage, right? So I've identified some here. For example, get their primary email, get their primary phone number, and get their current address, right? As a basic of, if they're in this stage, they got there somehow. You must have had a conversation with them, whether it's a text, email, phone call, Facebook message. And so we want to put them in a place and then have some checkpoints so that you don't lose track of them. Because what a lot of agents do, they might put them in there and then they don't have a checklist, they don't have a follow-up plan. And then a year goes down, a year down the road, you reach out to them and they say, oh yeah, we already bought a place. Yeah, because you had no follow-up, follow-through with them. So that's my goal, is to create these checklists, processes. I was hoping to do it with you guys, right? Because, you know, if I had 5 people that were saying, yeah, I want to participate and get involved, then I could say, hey, Ann Rosen, can you work on Cultivate with Matt, Dylan, and Jennifer, and see what you come up with, a basic checklist. And then we would come back and regroup and come up with, here's what we've come up with. More heads are better than one. And plus, it'll spread out the bandwidth of what we're trying to create. So if I were to do this all by myself, it might take me a month or so to go through every single checklist. So the hopes was to get more people involved in this, but we have what we have in front of us, and we'll work with it. And maybe I'll do other sessions like this to get more people involved and start assigning people to do some of these things. And so, for example, Jennifer, you're a brand new agent. You're looking at this like, I have no idea what Joe's talking about. I'm going to go and make some lunch and come back because I don't know what he's talking about. Right. So, this is kind of not advanced for you, but something that you should be thinking about is if you did have a buyer, what are you going to do? What are the steps? What are the flows? And so in here, I also put in, for example, the 20%. And that is in terms of the contact complete score, right? Having an email is worth 20% of that score. So if you have an email, phone number, address, and obviously you're going to have their name. I say obviously, but maybe you don't, right? Sometimes in your phone, you have someone as Pat without a last name. You just know their first name is Pat, right? And you text them and all that stuff. And then 6 months from now, you get a message from Pat and you're like, I don't know who Pat is. Is Pat a guy or Pat a girl? I don't know. Who's Pat? Right? So I'm trying to put some logic behind why I have things in certain groupings. Because then if you have an address, you can add them to a monthly neighborhood nurture. So you can see here in the nurture 3 to 9 months, I have add smart plan for either a biweekly neighborhood nurture or monthly neighborhood nurture, depending on where they are in the 3 to 9 month process. If they're in three month, I might do them every other week. If they're 9 months, I might set them up on a monthly neighborhood, right? I don't want to bombard them too much. Okay, so that's what I wanted to go over with you guys is how do we create a checklist for you, the agent, so that you are in better control, you have less chaos, you have more direction, and you're going to hit the major milestone key point topics of maintaining that relationship with whether it's your buyer or seller. So for example, I've got, tell our story, email, tell our story, right? So that would be something that I would create for myself to say, who am I and how am I here to help you? So we can create a draft of what that would look like. And then basically you guys can customize it. And Jennifer's, yours would be very different than mine, right? You're probably more hungry, energized, and have all this time for that buyer, seller, whoever you're working with, right? Where if I'm spread and I've got 10 different buyers and sellers I'm working with, I'm not going to be on them 24/7. Where if you only have one person you're working with, you can dedicate 24/7 time with them.
Yeah.
Right. So your verbiage around this is you're hungry. Not that I'm not hungry, but like you're hungry. You want this to work for yourself. You're coming into this industry with fresh eyes. And so your story is going to be very different than mine. But if we had a placeholder for tell your story, then that would force you to create what that story is. And once you've created that, then it's going to be consistent going forward, right? It's done. Now you could tweak it over time. And even this checklist, from my perspective, it's never going to be done 100%, because my goal would be that we have this at a 80% complete, such that it's a living document, right? So Kathy, have you done transactions before?
Yes.
Okay. So is it fair to say that you can learn something new that you've never experienced before?
Yes, because each buyer is different from the previous one.
Yeah.
Different. They come up with questions sometimes that amaze me. So,
Yeah. Exactly, exactly. There's always something new to learn. And when the way I look at it is when a client asks me a question, in my mind, I go to, is that a question that other clients are going to be having or have had? And this person is just the first one to bring it to my attention, right? And if that is a question, one of the things I want to do is create that perfect sales transaction with the consumer. So I want to be able to anticipate where we are and what's next. And that's a message I want to give to my clients is here's where we are today and here's what's next. One of my pet peeves is when a client says, hey, what's next? What's going on? Where are we? If they ask me that, I feel like I haven't done my job. I should be leading them through the transaction. They shouldn't be chasing me to find out where we are. So having this type of checklist is, in my opinion, something that we should all have at some level. And again, it could be, 10 steps for one person, and it could be 30 steps for the next person because they have a lot more experience around everything. Does that make sense?
Joe, I have a question for you. The checklist that we're looking on the screen right now, is this something we're able to
It's
print out?
from the office.
Yes,
He wants to talk to me.
yes.
I need time. Sorry, someone else was. Ask that again.
Well, two questions actually. So I know you're recording this. Would we have access to this recording later?
Yes. So my goal is to have access. You have access to this recording, and then I would give access to this spreadsheet. And the goal would be to help you guys create this perfect experience checklist.
So we'll have this actual like on what, like an Excel spreadsheet, or just we can just print it out?
Well, this is a Google Docs. So it's like Excel,
Oh,
right? So you can come in and make changes.
okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
Okay. Now, what's here, it's not complete, right? There's no way for me to be able to complete all this. If you look at the bottom here, you see I've got like the cultivate, the appointment steps, once you're active. And let me show you, in terms of active, right? They're searching online versus you're actually showing them properties versus you're negotiating properties. And for each of these, there's discussion points, right? So they're looking online. You can have that discussion about agency and compensation. How do you get paid, right? And what about a for sale by owner? What if they find one of those? So this will give you some discussion talking points, and then you could just check them off the list. So we have them here in a spreadsheet, and then the goal would be to add it in the opportunity here. So I've got like 3 steps here: send a personal note, source, where did they come from, and add them to the DTT2, to the database 2, for those of you that knows what that is. And then you could check them off your list. And you could see it says, oh, you finished one of 3 things for this particular phase and stage of where you are. Right? So then you could have this as your guide point, and you can see for this particular person, Olivier Moth, I've completed 2 of the 3 steps. Right? And then they could move from watch. Let's say I have a conversation with them and they're like, okay, we're now 9 months into the process. I slide them to this side, and now there's another task for them. Add to monthly neighborhood nurture. Right? So as you take them through this life cycle of a buyer or seller, it's going to come up with new things for you. Oops. Right? So you have to create this. This isn't automatically done for you. So that's the purpose of this conversation, is to go through this and what makes sense. What makes sense for you at a base level, And Kathy, you have much more experience than Jennifer, so your checklist might be much more involved, much more detailed. There might be some specific things that you do because of your experience that Jennifer would have no idea and wouldn't need to do at her stage of her career. Right?
Right.
Okay, so that would be our goal, is to build this out. And you can see it's got B stands for buyer, and L stands for listing. So we have, it could be very similar, but again, you might be wearing the hat of you're representing your seller versus representing the buyer. So the conversation could be a little bit different. Okay. Let's see, Jean, you're on here too, and you've created your checklist. What are your thoughts on this topic? Do you use Command? Do you just use a spreadsheet? How do you keep track of where you are in the life cycle of a buyer or seller?
I don't know where to start with all that. There was a lot. We have the checklist in Command, and one of our intentions for 2021, and this is huge in how we've structured our team now, is whose 20% does a lot of the checklist belong to? The agent in the transaction coordinator. We just hired a client relationship specialist. So we're actually in discussions about all of this and who is the best person. And sometimes it could be all three to have a conversation. I love what you said, that it's our responsibility to guide the client through the transaction. I think our commitment is, if we can answer the question before they figure out they needed to ask it, then we're doing it right.
Absolutely agree.
So
absolutely.
I want to leverage the email capability in this too, that we can assign the seller, team member, our client specialist, a rainmaker, whoever we can assign, so that they pop up on our tasks. That's a work in progress right now.
Yeah. And so on my screen here, you can see where I've got a couple columns here. The client update, if you have this checked, you can see the email pops up. And what will happen is, when you complete the task, it will send a daily email to the client that says, hey, I've completed these things. Right? So obviously you wouldn't need to say, hey, I've sent you a personal note. So that's not a good example of that. Nor would you say, added to do the database too. But if it was received and sent condo docs to the attorney, sent condo docs to the lender, sent contracts to the attorneys, followed up with the attorney, followed up with the lender, all those things could be relevant and important for you to be able to automatically communicate with your sellers all the things you're doing. Right? And that's the important part, because one of the things that our clients tell us is, especially if they say you don't communicate enough, or they start asking questions, where are we, what's next? That's an opportunity for us to improve on leading them through the transaction, always saying, here's where we are and here's what's next. So in terms of my transaction coordinator, Allie, who's not on here, let me just double check before I talk about her. That's one of the things I mentioned to her, is like, end each email with, and here's what's next. Right?
Good idea.
And here's what's next, and maybe a timeline. Right? For example, the appraisal just got completed. We let them know, hey, it got completed. It could be up to 10 days before we hear back. If we hear back in 5, great. But then they're not in 3 days from now, did the appraisal come back? Did the appraisal come back? Did the appraisal come back? Right? So there's 2 parts here. One is giving the client an email of the things that we've completed. The second part is assigning. So Jean, this might be more relevant to you, is assigning this to someone on your team. Right? So I've got a team set up here, and it says the Joe Green team. So that would be the rainmaker responsibility. Allie would be the transaction coordinator, and this would be the assigned agent. So you could break it down to that level if you're a team. If you're a solo agent, it's all you. Jennifer, you're doing all this all by yourself.
No pressure.
No pressure. But at the same time, you have all this energy that, I'm ready to take a nap already.
And with a checklist, though, you get reminded, or you can set it up to be reminded so you don't have to think and remember. That's the beauty. So a single agent can handle it. So don't.
Yeah. And it guarantees that you don't forget something. Right? How many times did you like, oh, well, I forgot to do this? Right? This would guarantee that you don't forget to do this.
I think, Joe, if I can interject for a second, speaking to maybe Jennifer, because you're a new agent. If you see a checklist in a phase, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, if you see a checklist in a phase that's overwhelming, you need to make your own checklists. Just like Kathy said, every client is different. There's no perfect checklist for every agent. You're going to run your business differently. I mean, Joe and I, this morning, we had probably compared checklists. Joe, yours looks different than mine because our clients are different. The way we run our business is different. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things on your checklist, that's fine. As you go through and you figure out what you do, write it down. It's kind of like a brain dump. What did I do for my clients today? Just write it all down. And then at the end of the week or the end of the month, go through and go, okay, that should be a checklist item. That should be a checklist item.
Yeah, and that would be my goal, is to have something that's very basic that can be used by 80% of the agents. Right? And then use that as a launch pad for those of you that are more experienced. And the basic checklist is going to be minimal. It's going to be 3 to 5 steps, maybe per phase, per stage, right? Mine, on the other hand, might be 20 to 30 steps in a particular phase and stage.
Well, and it's, Joe, if I could add, it's also, it's not so much about experience, it's also about leverage. It's about having, if it's something that takes manpower, human power to do, then having that person to do it. I mean, if we go back to the MREA checklist, right, there's certain things you just don't do until you have that leverage.
Right.
And that's okay.
So high level, that's the purpose of what I wanted to just talk about today. And again, this is an overwhelming task for one person to do. And the hopes was that there'd be enough people on here that have interest, that'd be willing to step up and say, hey, I will take on the buyer cultivate checklist from the mindset of what's the basics that a new agent or someone that does under 10 transactions a year need so that they can pass through the compliance phase at the market center and pass through the green sheets and getting paid at the market center, because we all want to get paid in a timely manner. And if you're missing documents, you're missing initials, you're missing processes, there's one thing to be missing from the market center, but then we also want to make sure that you have the checklist so that you're communicating properly, efficiently, and in a timely manner with your buyers and sellers that you're working with. Right? So if this email of tell your story, that might not make the cut of the basics of what 80% of the agents would need. That's kind of a more of a plus, right? We can put it in there, and if they want to add it in for their checklist, great. And if they don't have one created, then remove it, right? There's going to be things in here that says, share your Keller Mortgage link. Why Keller Mortgage? You might not know what Keller Mortgage is. Your listing presentation, your buyer presentation, those are going to be in here somewhere. And if you don't have one, that's an opportunity to say, hey, I don't have one of these. Where can I get one? And for those of you that are newer and maybe you're in productivity coaching, the Market Center might have a pre-canned presentation for you. There's a lot of agents, at least in our Market Center, One Chicago, that do training on the buyer presentation, the listing presentation. And make sure you, when you're ready for that step, that you attend those sessions. It's hard to know what to present to you guys because we're each coming from a different perspective and we have different needs, right? And you might have a need today that Jean might not have a need for 3 months. So it's hard to say, hey, we're going to work on this. And Jean's like, I don't need this right now. Or Jennifer's like, she's a sponge. She's going to be like, I'm going to all of these. And Jennifer, that's how you're going to learn more and more, is by hearing different people tell their story about how they do things. And all these things, if we were to group it in certain sections, would get your brains thinking. And for a new agent, you might say, well, why is that important? Right? Why is this particular step important? And Jean might come up with a scenario that says, hey, you know, I missed this step once and it caused this to happen. And as a result, she's including that on her checklist going forward because she never wants to have that happen again. Right? Anyone have a story that they want to share about something like that? I've got one that, you know, I can come up with, but I don't want to be the only one.
My entire checklist. It's all from screwing up.
Yes, exactly.
If you can't fail forward, then what are we doing?
Right, right. Do you have a specific story that you can think of off the top of your head?
You know, one that I think I need to add to my checklist actually is, at least out by us in the suburbs, I don't know how it is in the city, surveyors. I've been in the business for a long time, but last year I had a seller call me irate that there was someone walking around their yard that had not made an appointment. And it made sense, but now I have to add in there a conversation that says the surveyor could come out the day before closing. They're not going to make an appointment. They don't care if you have a dog. I don't know when they're coming. The attorney doesn't communicate it to me. You want to close? Let them in the yard. That's all there is.
Exactly, exactly. And that isn't something that we normally think about until it does become an issue, until you get that irate client saying, there's someone in my backyard, you didn't tell me about it.
And it's all my fault.
And it's all your fault. It's all our fault because we didn't communicate to them. And we wouldn't know that until someone yelled at us. Or
only took me 25 years to get yelled at on that one.
Yeah, and it could be a one-off scenario like that. The story that I'll share with you guys has to deal with a home warranty, right? You negotiate a home warranty, and what happens after the closing? Who follows up to make sure the home warranty took place, is active? You get a call 6 months after the closing from a buyer that says, hey, I just called the home warranty company and they don't have any record of us having a home warranty. Who's paying for my furnace?
Oh boy.
Right? You get a call like that and you're making sure that you have a after the close follow-up of 10 days after closing, make sure you call the home warranty company to verify your account's been active. Right?
Yep.
It's those types of scenarios that causes you to have something added to your checklist. However, if we gave a new agent a 500-step checklist, they're going to quit. They're going to be like, oh my God, I can't do all this stuff. They're going to quit. So that's why we can't give you the entire complete unabridged version of the life cycle of a buyer and seller, because it's going to be A, different for every person, and B, it's something that you have to participate in and experience.
Plus, one thing I could add to that too, Joe, because you're in the Chicago area. I'm actually from Chicago, and I know the Chicago has a tax thing like $350, $1,000 for the seller and $750 for the buyer, and that sometimes can create a whole nother situation for a buyer qualifying if they're not aware of that, or they get blindsided. So
Yeah.
Chicago can be a trick bag.
right? And so where is that in your process? Where is that
Yeah, it would have
conversation?
to be part of, when you're talking with the lender to make sure they're aware. A lot of times the lenders that I work with out here in the western suburbs, they don't do much in Chicago. You know, their concentration is pretty much, you know, done by us local real estate agents. And if we're in Orland Park, they're Orland, Mokina, you know,
Yeah,
they're not doing too much in the city of Chicago. That's like a whole different animal.
right. So if you had that, and I just went to the buyer active phase and online searching, if you had that as part of your discussions, process
Yeah.
expected costs, mortgage pre-approval, then you're going to have that checked off your list. Hey, I've had that conversation with them. And then this here, this column here, this is client update. That will then send them an email at the end of the day, say, we've had this conversation about this. Right?
Yes,
So if they
because
come back to you
every
and say,
town too has their own tax information. I sold a house in Glendale Heights, and there was the tax proration had to be done by you know, by the seller to move out. And then when she bought in Addison, she had to pay the transfer tax moving into the town of Addison, Illinois. So
yeah,
so that was something you have to know each town's village ordinances too.
yeah. And you know, that comes with experience. And you, like Gene says, you fail forward on these things. But this process, so this column here, client update, is which of these steps is going to trigger an email to your client at the end of the day. And then this one here for email is there a canned email, a template email that you can send? Because this first column is just saying, hey, we had a conversation about expected closing costs at a very high level. The email could be a draft that says, recapping our conversation, here's what we talked about: closing costs, earnest money, gift letters, right? Having a gift letter should be a discussion point, in my opinion, because if you wait till day of closing and the buyer's like, oh, I'm waiting to get a $10,000 check from my mom because she's helping me with my down payment, and the lender's just finding out about that, that could be a huge problem. That money needed to mature. So the more you can anticipate. Now, from my perspective, that should have been a lender conversation. And some of these things in our discussions and checkpoints are attorney conversations that should be happening. But again, who gets blamed if something goes wrong?
We do.
We do, absolutely. So that every time, so sometimes I've got one attorney and she's like, Joe, you're sending everything that I'm sending to my client. I'm like, that's great. We just want to make sure, and you know, that's great. And I'm going to be more likely to continue working with you because I know that they have process systems and process as well. But I don't want to take it. I don't want to take anything to chance. I don't want there to be a missed opportunity because at the end of the day, it's our fault. Okay, is this helpful for you? Is this something that you would want to explore a little bit deeper? And Gene, I know you already have your own checklist, but would it be beneficial for you to compare your checklist with my checklist or another checklist?
I think this is great. I love it.
Yeah.
Totally. Comparing's always good.
Yeah. Even if you're, Gene, you're like, Joe, I would never do all that. That's okay. It's okay to never do everything. And like we mentioned to Jennifer, your checklist might be 3 to 5 in each phase and stage. It doesn't have to be this detailed. But I do want to work with the market centers, our compliance team, to say, what are the bare bones minimum that you need for an agent to get paid? So some of this collaboration is going to come from them. Some of it's going to come from the MCA department, right? And some of it's going to come from experienced agents. And I'm going to work with like the productivity coach, at least at One Chicago, to say, hey, do you have a team that would be willing to go through this? So I don't have something that's 100% complete. right? So it's not like I can share all this. I mean, I could share this with you, but it's not 100% complete. It's a work in process. But I would like, if I did share it with you, to get your feedback and input and to be able to reach back out to you and say, hey, you know, can we work on the online searching process checklist? What's the bare bones that agents would need, and how can you plus it? And maybe that's what we have, you know, another section here to plus it, right? So if you're a rock star and you're like, hey, this would be a great step to have because of this. All right, any other comments, questions? We're going to be wrapping up. So again, this is recorded. I will hopefully remember everyone that's on here and be able to reach back out and share the recording with you. Or I might just put it on the Facebook group page or wherever you guys found it. Other questions, comments?
No, thanks for your time, Joe. This was really great, I think. I really
Yeah.
like it.
So
Thank
again,
you.
my goal is to do a Tuesday workshop with agents from 11 to 12. I want to say 11 to 11:45. It'll probably go through 12, but through 11:45 so that people know. And if you've got topics that you want brought up, let me know ahead of time and I can work on it as well. Probably next week is more on setting your goals for 2021. To actually do a workshop and say, all right, click on this button. How much do you want to make? What are your ratios? What are your conversion rates? What is your cap? That'll go under cost of sales. What are your expenses? As a new agent, your expenses are going to be a lot lower than someone that has a team. Someone that has a team is going to be paying salaries, splits with other buyers agents, listing agents, and all that good stuff. If you're brand new, right now, you might not have a lot of expenses because you're doing it all yourself. So your profit margin is going to be a lot higher per transaction, and you're doing all the work by yourself. So if there is a way to give you some sort of roadmap of how to get a person from contract to close. And it's not only the contract to close portion, it's you have them, they called you, you reach out to them as a buyer or seller. Where are they in the process? Are they more than 9 months? Are they between 3 and 9 months? Are they hot? They're 3 months away. And right now we probably have a lot of hot people, right? Spring market's right around the corner in Chicago. There's a certain level of confidence that people are having now that, you know, the election's over, there's a vaccine coming around. I still think we should practice safely, but you know, everyone's got their own little tolerance and what they're willing to do. But that's my goal. That's my objective, to help the agents build a better model for themselves. And it not only helps us as agents, it helps the market center. And you know, I love the camaraderie that we have when we're engaged in these types of conversations. So if there's someone else that you want to invite next week or a topic that you have, feel free to reach out to me.
Do we have your email, or do we reach out to you on the Facebook thing that I found you?
Good question. Let me put that in the chat.
Oh.
So what is my email? Because they just gave me a new one as a tech role.
There's going to be a test on this.
I know, and I'm.
I was just emailing you. I don't know if it's the same one. It's tech1@kw.com.
Nope, that's the old one. That used to be the one that I had. Bear with me 1 second. I'll be able to look it up. But yeah, feel free to reach out and give me ideas, suggestions. I'm planning on doing this every Tuesday from 11 o'clock. It'll be via Zoom like this. I prefer it to be interactive because I can only take so much of myself.
Joe. You're incognito.
Yeah, because I have multiple logins, so if I have to go in incognito to log into my other account. Otherwise, it'll log into my personal one. So hold on 1 second. What else do people have going on?
Oh.
Do you,
Do you have
what's
stuff in here on
your,
open houses?
say
Do you
again?
have stuff in here in the open houses, the 7-step, like whatever that we know in bold?
I don't.
Underneath the listing checklist, maybe?
Yeah, there might be something in here about, because I know I was working on something for short sales, to have a whole process for short sales, but again, that's going to be more of an
Yeah.
advanced topic.
Short sales and foreclosure.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, KW Tech. Where was that chat? KW Tech at KW1 Chicago. There it is.
Tech one.
Yes, so. Okay, KW Tech at KW1Chicago.com. Jem, you could share that with everyone. Jem messaged me on it and it's like, share with everyone. Okay. All right, that's all I
Thank
have
you,
for
Joe.
today.
Thanks
I
for your
appreciate it.
time.
Yep, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
Bye.